Our neighbor, Mr. Kazaropel, loved to visit Purgatory and was always happy to take us kids along for the ride. And Mr. Kazaropel was a fireman, so he was a good guy to have around if things went wrong. A few times each summer, he'd pack us into his station wagon, 3 deep in the back, 3 stuffed into the back seat, and 2 wedged up into the front. Seatbeltless, mind you. Mr. Kazaropel pulled the wagon out and headed west towards Purgatory, a mere 30 miles door to door. Purgatory was cool. Really cool. Cave cool. Purgatory is Purgatory Chasm State Reservation, a geological preserve in Sutton, Massachusetts. At the end of the Ice Age, some 14,000 years ago, a melting glacier deposited huge rocks, forming a chasm. Now, Purgatory Chasm got its name from early colonists unfamiliar with the geological deep time story. They believed that the devil stomped on the grounds, forcing the granite rock to split open. There was no better playground than Purgatory. We clambered over rocks and climbed the rock formation, traversed the caves, making our way through the corn crib, reaching the heights of the pulpit, and peering over Lover's Leap. We inched our way along and through Fat Man's Misery, which Mr. Kazaropel always declined. Inside the caves of Purgatory, we became deep time travelers in search of a story that cracked the wide rock open. Now, I lost interest in the devil a long time ago, but the story of geological time, deep time, and our relationship to it intrigues me. How are we part of this ongoingness of time? I wonder what role we might play in the coming chapters. Before we arrived on the block, time unfolded through eons and epochs: the Precambrian, the Paleozoic, the Mesozoic, the Cenozoic, mere billions of years ago. We stand on the thick accumulation of those Underland stories. If our hope is to be part of the ongoingness, caretakers and co-creators, we need to imagine ourselves as part of deep time. That recognition, nature writer Robert Macfarlane says, might help us to see ourselves as part of the web of gift, inheritance, and legacy stretching over millions and millions of years to come, bringing us back to this, bringing us to think that we leave behind for the epochs and the beings that will follow. These days, we travel at the speed of instanticity, leaving little room to contemplate our relationship to deep time. In our rush to move things along, we've entered what some scientists call the Anthropocene, our current location in geological time. While its roots go back to the industrial age, the Great Acceleration, members of the Anthropocene Working Group mark their calendars on a sunny day in June 1945, when the first nuclear weapon was detonated in New Mexico. Its traces, like ancient fossils, are all around us. In a mere 50 years, our relationship to time has shifted. If there is a gift to be found in the Anthropocene, it's the promise of our great awakening. Let's hope we can set down our smartphones long enough to be stirred into action. How you connect to the deep time story depends on how you see it. Macfarlane asks us to look beyond the horizon, past what he calls flat ontology. Ontology being a fancy word to describe the nature of being. A flat ontology is a pessimistic philosophical point of view that says life is insignificant, story over. In other words, fatalism. What our time requires is the opposite. We need a scintillating ontology, a bright-eyed ontology that relishes the relationships between things. In those scintillating ontological relationships, sparks fly. The movers and shakers behind this ontological movement will include artists and activists, thinkers, lovers of life who are drawn into the deep story that lies beneath our feet and stretches to the far ends of space. The job description for being a scintillating ontologist is to keep the deep time story going. There's one such ontologist who can be found deep inside a cave in a potash mine operation in Yorkshire, England. His name is Christopher Toth, a scientist who spends his days and nights inside a cube called the drift, trying to catch the faint breath of a particle wind that blew through space billions of years ago and is assumed buried deep inside Earth's core. Toth trains his eye to look for a trace fossil of time, the cosmic treasure buried deep inside the dirt. When asked what keeps him there, searching, he said, "Everything is scintillation." Toth searches in the darkness, seeking to find the spark of life. Throughout much of our human history, across cultures and traditions, in the caves and crevices, the mountains, the forests, the glaciers, the oceans, the rivers, the rhythmic oscillations, the formations, the shifts, we searched for signs of life embedded into the strata of deep time. As we march into the Anthropocene, will we remember to stop and to listen? Keep searching for the distant spark in hope that we stay connected to the deeper story. Let me share a personal story about seeking that connection. When I was in seminary, I studied with Joanna Macy, a committed deep ecologist and Buddhist scholar. In a day-long workshop, Joanna led us on a deep time journey, traveling back to the birth of the cosmos, mingling in Earth's long creation story, moving through the eons and the epochs of geological time. Finally, we arrived and stood on the savannah under a glowing sun, looking forward across the horizon. Time sped up, and we found ourselves in the shadow of the soaring towers of a nuclear reactor, rising out of the ground like some kind of medieval cathedral. Standing before the monoliths, the elders called us to witness and worship. In the face of mass destruction, we were asked to stay in the story, see ourselves as an integral part of it, a story of our own making. It could have been easy to flee, claim myself a card-carrying member of the flat ontologist clubs, and run for the hills. But in that imagined, unimaginable moment, sensing the impending doom, I stayed put and tried to stay present. That day, something shifted, or maybe it stirred. I walked out into the gray autumn sky. I greeted the trees, marveling at how the leaves just fall. My lips kissed the air. I smiled at the people walking by, just going about their day. That day, my sense of time, my relationship to time, it shifted. Deep inside the Chavot caves in France are the oldest cave paintings ever found. The archaeologist Simon McBurney reflects, perhaps this is what truly separates us from the makers of this art. It is not the space of time, but the sense of time. It wasn't measured, it unfolded day into night, moving through the seasons. Now, we carve up time in the name of efficiency and profit, giving way to the speed of instanticity. We look to beat time, save time, find time, bend time. It's as if we've lost touch with how to move through time, be part of its unfolding, attuned to and attentive to its rhythms. How do we get our groove back? Those early artists offer a clue. We'll never know why they created the paintings. We are left to infer and imagine. When we look at the cave drawings or earlier prehistoric art forms dating back hundreds and thousands of years, they spark our imaginations, illuminating the long, rich tale of time. I like to imagine that the human species evolved to appreciate creation. But times have changed, and somewhere along the timeline, we disconnected from the original creation story. It's time to reconnect, sense our bodies moving to the deep beat and rolling into that age-old groove. When we find ourselves in that moment, we will arrive at what the environmental philosopher Glenn Albrecht calls the symbiocene, from the Greek symbiosis, meaning companionship. In the groove of the symbiocene, we move in ways that reinforce life-producing forms in the living systems. Which brings me to church. This sanctuary, built of ancient stone and redwood, the grains of sand heated to high temperatures to create these beautiful stained glass windows. Here, inside the pocket, we search for the sparks that connect us to one another. We listen for the cracks in the chasms as our hearts break open, sensing the beauty and the pain sensing the beauty and the pain. In a flash, we look deep into the horizon, beyond the flat ontology that has taken hold. We feel something move and give way to the groove. We feel the beat beneath, the pulse beneath our feet, connecting us to the hallowed ground from which we came. Time will tell what the next chapter will be. I think of Dennis's fireflies in the jar, pulsing and sparkling like stars in the dark. I think of the deep woods where stillness gave him time to move through despair. What shape and direction will we give our story? The artist Makoto Fujimura practices the centuries-old art form known as kintsugi, mending broken pottery using a lacquer dusted with gold. The art is not to hide what is broken, but in the mending, create something beautiful. The golden lacquer, like a light, illuminates the story. With our hands and our eyes, we follow the traces. Kin in Japanese is the word for gold. Tsuki means mend, but also means to link the generations together, writes Fujimura. And then I reimagine the imagined congregation circling around those nuclear reactors. I think of the cloud of witnesses keeping watch over those entrapped in the camps. I think of the gatherings of people through time who stood, spoke out, sang in the name of love, of peace and justice, and the beauty and the bounty of the planet. I remember that despite it all, we come together to offer help, to be in the struggle, to never give up. We find a way to put the pieces together and bring beauty back into the world. May luck be with us as we learn our parts in the song of the Symbiocene. May we be worthy companions, menders and healers, mappers and cartographers, wise movers, soul-filled shakers, endeavoring to pick up the pieces, and together tracing the storyline, stewarding to the landscape for those yet to come. Before we go, imagine you've made a time capsule holding the story of your life, one that will be found in the future far, far from now. Eons pass. A being discovers your time capsule. Maybe it surfaced from the sediment of the ocean or river. Maybe it was found deep in a cave. Maybe it slipped out of the ice. No matter. The finder carries a pouch of gold dust and a bottle of lacquer and lays the pieces before them, gently blending the dust and lacquer they form an elixir. With the eyes of an artist and the hands of a healer, they go about the slow work of putting the pieces together, bringing your story to life. What will be your story in this ongoingness of time? When I surfaced out of the chasm in purgatory, resting against the rock, beneath me I felt the beat and the groove, or maybe for the first time, I heard my heart beat, sensing the deep connections, the idea that we are forever entwined in the story of time, and that, in the moment, seemed miraculous. Let me close our time with the words from the writer and geologist Kim Marie Walker. Our collective footprints dent deeply our exquisite planet and billow beyond our stratosphere. I speak for my ancestors whose climate change consciousness began as survivors of the transatlantic enslaving trade. I speak for my way back ancestors, Homo erectus, who almost 2 million years ago witnessed the Pleistocene Earth and flourished and evolved because of climate cooling. At times, I am both frightened out of my wits and happy, dancing with hope to be alive at this time, pondering the systems of the earth, its cycles of dying and changing. Let us continue that journey together.